are now going to move into our first panel discussion, and it is titled Next Era Policing, What's on the Horizon?
There are so many similarities between what happens in the United States and what happens in Canada, particularly in the major cities. You know, a lot of the issues that we face are very similar. A lot of the political issues that we face are very similar. And in San Francisco, it is a very, very political city. And what we see is years of, law changes and manifestation of that is, for a lot of people, a sense of lawlessness that we have in our city. Now, I will say oftentimes what's projected to the world in terms of what San Francisco is not the reality of what that city is. You know, somebody that is there day in and day out, it's a beautiful city. Like many cities, across North America, it's a beautiful city, but what gets projected is the worst of our city. And a lot of that has to do with policies over the years. For instance, property crime has been traditionally very high in San Francisco in general. But when you look at how we got here, there were a series of laws about a little bit over a decade ago, that really de-emphasized punishment for those types of crimes. And we saw a shift to, at least in our city, from violent crime to property crime is the thing. I mean, the risk is low for those that want to use that to profit and prey on others. There's very little jail time. But I want to go back to what Chief McFee said earlier. We often say we can't arrest our way out of this problem, but it doesn't mean we can't and should not arrest people for breaking the law. So in San Francisco, we've really kind of gone back to the basics with a lot of these issues that we're facing. Property crime, we arrest a lot of people. And what we find is a lot of it is fueled by the drug market. Fentanyl is killing our city. Our overdose rates have gone through the roof, particularly post-COVID.
Just listening to my panelists, in terms of what's coming on the horizon for policing, I would absolutely underline that policing is likely to become far more politicized in the years to come. And that sounds very negative, but it's an inevitability and something that has to be understood and navigated rather than avoided, for the reason that policing is inherently political. It's political at the conceptual level, when people change their minds about the proper role of the state in regulating markets and in getting involved in citizens' lives. The police get caught up in those debates, shall we say, or protests in society. It's related to politics at the structural level. When we have new hypercommunications technologies and our markets change, we produce and sell different things. There are new opportunities for crime and new spheres that require regulation. And there's also a great deal of mis and disinformation where police organizations are very often having to co-produce safety with a population that has been victim of being misled through those media. Finally, at the individual level, there's both darker and lighter aspects of the politicization of policing. On the darker side, we're concerned with things like undue political interference in police operations, and it's of course your responsibility to push back in all of those circumstances. But more positively, given that policing is becoming increasingly integrated into community safety and well-being, into discussions around shifting approaches to drugs, decriminalization and different programs on a grade for how far you go in that direction, concerns over bail reform, there's an essential role for police organizations themselves, and perhaps working with their civilian oversight bodies, to be involved in those policy discussions. Because obviously there's knock-on effects. If you change bail approaches, there needs to be a policing response to deal with the new bail reality. If you change drug approaches, there's a different approach on the ground for police responses. It's better to be proactive and be involved in designing those systems beforehand.
You mentioned leadership. I think I've been a big believer as a chief of police. We really have two roles of leadership. We have the voice of authority, which obviously is legislated, and we have the ability to enforce the law. But we also have the voice of influence, which is the influence, as you mentioned, to try to get the right partners to the table, and then we actually get going in the same direction, because in absence of that, we're taking those calls anyway. And I know you're doing some really, really good stuff that's going to come out in this conference about the alternative service delivery models and stuff, but how do you basically use that to mobilize your community and get people going in the same direction? Anything you want to share? And then I'm going to get Adam to jump in because I know he's got some things to add.
You know, I think the first important thing we need to recognize that is a chief has to balance the needs of the community, but the needs of the organization. And over the past few years, I've seen too many chiefs lose their department in trying to please the public always. And it's tough recruiting, retaining officers. It's a tough environment to be a police officer. And chiefs have to also be brave enough to praise and defend their people and their officers and their staff, but at the same time hold them accountable. But they have to be able to voice this out to the community. And we're going through a tough time in Albuquerque. We have done a lot of great things. Property crimes is down 50% in the last 6 years. There's no city who wouldn't be happy. We are on the verge of getting out of our consent decree. We're hoping either in the fall or the spring. Big milestone for us. We have the biggest academy class right now we've had in a decade. We have 60 cadets in the academy class, and our feeder program has 30. But with all those successes, we still last year had the highest number of homicides ever in the city's history. And we cleared 95% of our clearance rate is 95% right now on homicides. So our successes are there, but we still had record number of homicides. We had a record.
How many is that, Harold, just so people know?
Last year we had 121 homicides for a city of 575,000. And not only do we have 121 homicides, we are on the verge of getting out of our consent decree for constitutional policing. We're being praised by a lot of the programs we have and how we've changed, and we still had 18 officer-involved shootings. 18, and that is also a record number. So with all these successes that we're able to advertise to the community, we still have glaring numbers that people can use to say, hey, is it really changing? And I think that's where leadership really needs to step up and be as transparent and honest with the community as possible. I am very much for the philosophy that I will tell the public it happened before the public finds out it happened, and explaining. And I've learned that explaining things to the communities is much more important than anything else.